While pregnant with Chuck Norris, his mother was thrown in jail for carrying a concealed weapon. Today, I'm going to recap a 2008 action fantasy film called Jumper. In a tiny U.S. countryside village, David resides with his harsh father William, but not with his mother, who departed when he was just 5. At school, David enjoys spending time with his crush Millie, a girl who aspires to journey across the globe. Aware of her aspiration, David one day presents Millie with a snow globe containing the Eiffel Tower. Millie adores it, but the pleasant moment is disrupted by Mark, who mocks David, calling him a nerd, and tosses the snow globe onto a frozen lake. David is resolved to get it back, but as he steps on the ice, it can't support his weight and cracks. The icy water engulfs the boy, causing him to panic until he vanishes from the lake, only to reappear in a library. Bewildered and frightened, David opts to dismiss the incident and heads home. On arriving, William scolds David for his tardiness, prompting David to seek refuge in his room and lock the door. Enraged, William forcefully tries to open the door, and just as he's about to break in, David vanishes, reappearing in the library. Accepting his newfound abilities, David goes back home, takes his savings, and flees to begin anew. First, he visits Millie's home to leave the snow globe as a sign of his safety. Then, David relocates to the city, leases a shabby motel room, and starts experimenting with his abilities. Initially, he collides with a tree, but eventually learns to control his power by focusing on images of his desired destinations. His inaugural trip is to the Empire State Building, where he holds dear memories of his mother Mary. Once confident, David scopes out a bank to familiarize himself with its interior, and later teleports into the vault to pilfer all the money. As David revels in his small room, the bank uncovers the theft, and Roland arrives posing as NSA. He is familiar with such incidents and is aware of jumpers, even suspecting one is responsible. 8 years on, David is leading an incredible life. He resides in a lavish penthouse apartment in New York, adorned with costly items, and has mastered his powers to such an extent that he uses them merely to get to the kitchen. His walls are covered in photographs of iconic places, enabling him to instantly transport himself anywhere globally to enjoy the day, such as having a meal atop the Sphinx. One night, he appears in London and steps into a pub, where he teleports to the bar to charm a woman. Griffin observes this recklessness, but David remains oblivious and departs with the woman. Concurrently, another jumper materializes amidst a lush jungle, only to be ensnared in a wire net that electrocutes him, preventing further teleportation. Roland and his team, known as the Paladins, set this trap. They pursue jumpers, deeming them to be unnatural. Roland unhesitatingly kills the boy, and then receives information on their next target. Shortly thereafter, David comes back to his apartment to find Roland, who has gathered all the notes David has left in bank vaults over time. David attempts to eject him, but Roland counters by striking him with a unique baton that delivers 1,000 volts, restricting David's teleportation to within the apartment. A confrontation breaks out, and after much effort, David succeeds in teleporting into a concealed space in his wall, severing the baton's cable. Roland traces the cable and starts to demolish the wall, but David swiftly grabs a pile of cash and teleports away. Persistent, Roland examines the photos and dispatches his men to all of David's frequent jump locations. He also scrutinizes David's belongings and uncovers an old photo of Millie. Moments later, David materializes in his childhood room. William, hearing a sound from below, hurries to reconnect with his son, expressing that he feels delusional and that David is always welcome. David simply reassures William that he isn't delusional before vanishing once more. The following morning, David contemplates paying William a lasting visit, but struggles to muster the courage to speak with him. Instead, he heads to Millie's residence, where Millie's mother is astonished to find out that David is still alive and embraces him warmly. She tells David that Millie is employed at a nearby bar, prompting David to go there. However, upon seeing an older Millie, he feels overwhelmed with fear again. Attempting to exit unnoticed, David accidentally crosses paths with an older Mark, who promptly identifies him and starts inquiring. Mark's commotion is caught by Millie, who discloses that she noticed David upon his entry and was anticipating his approach. This incites envy in Mark, who attempts to flirt with Millie, leading David to strike him. A brawl ensues and spills outside, providing David an opportunity to shove Mark through a barrier and teleport him away discreetly. They materialize in the bank vault David had pilfered, where David warns Mark of graver consequences before teleporting away, leaving Mark confined in the vault as retribution. Subsequently, David goes back to the bar and engages in conversation with Millie, who abandoned her travel aspirations due to the practical need to work. David mentions that he is employed in the banking sector and proposes a trip to Rome, an invitation Millie gladly accepts. Unbeknownst to them, Griffin overhears the exchange while also present in the bar. Concurrently, Roland reaches the police station, posing as a CIA agent, and strikes the detective when met with skepticism. He then questions Mark, assuring him that he believes the extraordinary tale of teleportation. Grateful to have an ally, Mark divulges all he knows about David and Millie. Roland promptly instructs his team to head to Italy. Several hours later, David and Millie reach Rome and settle into an opulent hotel. Millie grows wary of David's actual profession, but he firmly asserts his honesty. The pair share an intimate moment before venturing out to relish the splendor of Rome, all while Griffin observes them from a distance. Ultimately, David and Millie attempt to access the coliseum, but find it has already shut down for the day. While Millie is preoccupied, David uses his teleportation ability to unlock a side entrance and feigns stumbling upon it in that state. The duo strolls through the space, relishing the historical ambience, with David repeating his trick whenever they encounter a locked entrance. When attempting to enter the lower section, David encounters Griffin casually urinating against a column. David endeavors to overlook him, but Griffin abruptly teleports before him and discloses the existence of jumpers worldwide. Griffin chastises David for involving a non-jumper and recklessly using his powers, thereby attracting undesirable attention. Just then, the paladins infiltrate the coliseum and initiate pursuit. David is promptly immobilized by a shock baton and rendered motionless, but Griffin, more adept at evading such tactics, escapes via teleportation and swiftly incapacitates them individually. He then informs David about the paladins before vanishing. Abruptly, a Coliseum staff member arrives, calling for assistance, prompting David to follow Griffin's teleportation trail to a concealed desert lair. Irritated, Griffin points out that David has abandoned Millie, prompting David to hastily return and usher Millie out of the premises. Regrettably, law enforcement is present outside, leading to their detainment. 8 hours later, the police persist in their attempts to question David, though they are unable to formally detain him until a representative from the U.S. Embassy arrives. This representative is revealed to be Mary, who liberates David from his restraints and instructs him to flee before additional paladins arrive. David endeavors to pursue her for clarification, but a police officer obstructs him, leading David to teleport the officer to Egypt as retribution. David then reappears at the station, assuring Millie that they have been inexplicably released. Skeptical, Millie questions the ease of their release, but David pleads for her trust and escorts her to the airport. Confused by their hasty departure despite the alleged resolution, Millie seeks answers. David displays the substantial cash in his possession, but withholds explanations, merely stating that they can no longer be together. Feeling deceived, Millie returns to her home city by herself. Simultaneously, Roland's squad contacts him, reporting their failure, as though someone had anticipated their arrival. Subsequently, Roland pays a visit to William, who feigns ignorance of his son's whereabouts for the past 8 years. William also concedes that even if he were to encounter David, he wouldn't disclose it to the authorities, a sentiment that doesn't sit well with Roland. Shortly after, David arrives at Griffin's secret base and discovers that Griffin actively pursues paladins with the intent to eliminate them. It is revealed that paladins have engaged in such practices for centuries, being implicated in events such as witch hunts and the Inquisition. Griffin highlights that if paladins fail to capture a jumper, they target their close relations, raising David's concerns. Millie is momentarily secure due to her extended flight, prompting David to teleport to his childhood residence, where he is heartbroken to discover William lifeless on the ground. Overwhelmed by sorrow, David, unable to think clearly, transports William to a medical facility, but the physicians are unable to revive him. Enraged, David visits the police precinct and courses Mark until he confesses to having divulged everything about their home locale, including David's affection for Millie, to Roland. David recognizes the urgency to apprehend Roland before Millie's arrival in the U.S., leading him to Griffin's hideout in an attempt to pilfer his paladin data. Griffin obstructs him, asserting that Roland, unlike his subordinates, poses a substantial threat. This revelation prompts David to propose a collaboration to vanquish Roland, but Griffin declines, expressing a preference for solitary operation. Griffin then teleports to Tokyo, with David tailing him, persistently urging a partnership. Griffin opts to hijack a sports car for amusement, taking David on a ride that demonstrates the vehicle's capability to teleport along the highway. David, unaccustomed to teleporting objects of such magnitude, learns from Griffin about an individual who once endeavored to teleport an entire structure but perished in the attempt. After incessantly requesting, Griffin finally agrees to collaborate, with the condition that David never reaches out to him again. Subsequently, they teleport to the airport, only to find that Millie has already landed and departed. David heads to the bar to inquire about her, and a server informs him that Roland had been inquiring about Millie as well. Next, David teleports to Millie's residence and is relieved to find her unharmed. Millie is unwilling to interact with him, but as David hears the paladins nearing, he starts divulging everything, teleporting to fetch the snow globe from the shelves as evidence. This frightens Millie, prompting her to attempt to flee, leaving David with no alternative but to forcibly take her to Griffin's secret base. This enrages Griffin, as he's aware that the paladins possess a device capable of generating wormholes using the residual traces of jumps. Concurrently, Roland and his team reach Millie's residence and proceed as Griffin had anticipated. While awaiting the wormhole's formation, the young men take cover, and David learns that Griffin's investigation encompasses his own mother, as Mary is also a paladin. Just then, Roland materializes and ensnares David with electrified cables. On the verge of executing him, Griffin intervenes wielding a flamethrower and engages Roland in combat. To neutralize Roland's technological advantage, Griffin teleports to the city to procure a bus, subsequently causing it to plummet onto Roland. Regrettably, Roland emerges unscathed, prompting Griffin to employ the flamethrower once more to force him back into the wormhole. Griffin then pursues him to continue the battle in Millie's residence. Simultaneously, Millie severs the cables to free David, extracting a promise from him to leave her alone after escorting her home. David consents and also admits that she has been his sole romantic interest since childhood. The tender exchange is disrupted by Griffin's return, bearing the paladin's device, under the impression that they can no longer be tracked. Nonetheless, Roland exploits the jump scar left by Griffin to dispatch a grappling hook that seizes Millie and transports her back to the apartment just before the scar seals shut. David is determined to rescue Millie, but Griffin starts assembling an explosive device with the intention of transporting it to the apartment to annihilate all the paladins once for all, indifferent to the possibility of Millie perishing in the explosion. Unwilling to sacrifice Millie, David seizes the bomb and discards it at the coliseum. Griffin instantly pursues him, leading to a confrontation over the detonation device as they teleport across various global locations. Eventually, they reach the summit of the Empire State Building, where David discards the detonator, necessitating a chase after it through a series of teleports. In a Chechen war zone, Griffin materializes a truck intending to strike David. Oblivious to the surrounding conflict, Griffin recovers the detonator, but David intercepts him, thrusting him against an electrified pylon that momentarily immobilizes Griffin. Subsequently, David returns to Millie's apartment, finding her restrained against a wall. As he attempts to free her, Roland assails him with an electrified baton, capturing him as well. Preparing to execute David, Roland is interrupted when Millie expresses remorse for her previous misconceptions, providing David with the emotional boost needed to amplify his abilities. Abruptly, the entire room vanishes from its location, materializing midstream in the Huron River. Disoriented underwater, David is steadied by Millie, who assists him in teleporting to an abandoned library. Upon regaining consciousness from a slap by Millie, David perceives Roland's continued presence. He teleports Millie to safety before confronting Roland, transporting him to a secluded cave within the Grand Canyon. Before departing, David highlights his moral restraint, having opted not to abandon Roland amidst sharks. Days later, David pursues leads regarding his mother to a residence in a snow-covered region. He uncovers that Mary has established a new existence with a daughter and confesses her departure was due to awareness of his abilities. Mary declines to abandon her paladin duties and embraces him, affirming her love but conceding that all she can provide is a warning. David departs, recognizing his mother as an adversary, and reunites with Millie, who accompanies him to a more temperate destination. If you enjoyed this video, don't be shy to hit the like button, and if you disliked it, hit the dislike button twice, just to be sure. It would be best if you watched the whole movie. Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe for more videos like this.